The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everybody, and thank you for joining us on this webinar where we're going to look at the MyNorth Guarantees, how they work, their value, and the typical client that we think they would appeal to. My name is Ian Parsons, and I am a National Development Manager with the AMP Group, and joining me today is Rob G, a Senior Product Manager within AMP, who's actually been intimately involved with the guarantees since they were first launched back in 2007. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping issues. As we all know and are finding, working in our changed world means that we are now more than ever reliant upon technology. Today's webinar is actually being run from 3 separate households in Melbourne, so please bear with us if there's any technical hiccups. Importantly, if at any stage you're unable to hear the broadcast or your internet drops out, please just refresh the browser. If that fails, then I'm really sorry, but what I can tell you is that we are recording this video and we will put it up on North Online under support training videos and their webinar recordings, so you can watch it at any point in the future, or you can also share it with your colleagues. Whilst we're running these sessions, whilst we're running the webinar, please feel free at any time to ask questions. You'll see on the left-hand side of the screen a little chat box. Please click on that, it will open up a question. Please type in the question and we will ensure that over the coming days we answer all those questions. Yeah? At the end, we'll also ask for a little quick survey on your views of how you've seen this webinar, and importantly, if you could fill that in, it enables us to plan for these future events. And given our world has changed, we think these events will become more and more common as time goes on. And lastly, before we start, as always, and very importantly, a disclaimer about this presentation itself. So I'll just pause there for a second to ensure you've had a quick read of that. Okay, in terms of an agenda today, what we're going to cover off on is we're going to cover off on our protected growth guarantee, which is the primary product that is used by our advisors for our clients. We're going to look at the underlying guardian funds, which are the investments for those guarantees, and we're going to cover off on the backing of those guarantees. In terms of the presentations themselves, I'm going to cover the first section, and then Rob will cover points 2 and point 3. But in a kind of weird way, how I'd like to start this presentation off is actually at the end. Let's look at an end position. And by that I mean, what I'd like to do is set the scene and talk about a real client, this is a real actual client, that invested in a guarantee, a protected growth guarantee, back in February of 2012. Right when markets were doing everything we'd love them to do. They were going up, they were lovely, it was the world was in a good position. But this client with their advisor thought it was important to insure their money. And this is the first kind of point I want to talk about. When we're talking about a capital guarantee, what we're really referring to is we're referring to insuring a client's wealth. And this picture shows what's actually happened for this client in the years following 2012. And what you can see on the screens, you can see this grey line, which is what we refer to as the protected balance. And that protected balance continuing to rise. What we're saying here is that the client's wealth and the insurance on their wealth is continuing to rise. That protected balance is the lowest amount of money, or the amount of money that we will pay a client at the end of the client's contract, so 10 or 20 years, as we'll discuss later on in the presentation. So in this situation, the client had and made a decision to invest their money in growth assets, right? So they took on an investment risk, but in taking on that investment risk, they also decided to insure it. And what we've seen as this journey goes on, in the 2016, when there was a bit of a hiccup in the market, so this line here is what the account value was actually doing, the protection gave them the confidence potentially to stay invested, which meant that they also could pick up. And what you can see is, again, on an annual basis, this client's been receiving annual lock-ins, annual increasing insurance, and we kind of get to today, which is the end point. Today, what we're now seeing is this client's insured value, what we refer to as their protected balance, means that all the market noise, all the volatility that we're currently experiencing, and I'm sure you're experiencing today with your clients, can kind of be ignored because they're insured. Yeah, they know that we've locked in all that growth, and worst case scenario comes, when this contract matures, they're going to get the vast majority of all those accumulated gains over time. So that's kind of the end position. How good would the conversation be with the client that rings up and says, what should I do? The markets have dropped 25%. I'm hearing that industry funds have got issues. I'm nervous, just put me to cash. How good would the conversation be if I could just say, but it's okay. Remember, we locked in. So if that's the end point, let's kind of now go to the beginning and see how does all that work and how does it all hang together. So from a positioning perspective, how do we see this? And I'm sure you would have all seen a picture of this type before. And if we think about it at the beginning of a client's working life, so when they've finished university or they're starting out in a trade, whatever it happens to be, we always talk about their human capital, their future earnings power being the greatest. Right? And at that stage, from an advice perspective, what we're talking to our clients about is we're talking about life insurance, income protection, trauma insurance, and we're also starting their financial capital and journey by putting them into a quality investment product, building up over time with their SGC and non-concessional contributions, all that stuff. We start to build up their worth. Yeah? And clearly, yeah, there's some cycles in there in terms of pre-family, family, pre-retirement, all those bits and pieces. But at a point in time, a person's human capital, their earnings power from wages and salaries and whatever, starts to diminish as their life goes, right? But their financial capital, assuming they've done all the right things, starts to increase. And at a point in time, there becomes a bit of a crossover where their financial capital actually becomes a really more valuable aspect to their overall lifestyle as they move into an active style of retirement, a passive style, and potentially care if that's required. Yeah, and it's at this point that we think that the guarantees become very, very applicable. We kind of refer to this as the critical zone. And the critical zone to us is where that time-honored principle of time in the market and compound earnings might not necessarily apply. It mightn't apply because at this point in time, a client mightn't have time in the market because, as we know, when a client hits retirement, they then need to fund their income in retirement. And if markets go down and they're negatively impacted and a client is forced to sell assets at that point in time, they don't have a choice, then we've crystallized a loss and there's no way of recovering from that loss. It's kind of a strange concept, but the volatility in the markets today for a young 25-year-old, assuming they have a job and they have a salary, is actually really beneficial because what we're doing is we're buying less or more units, I should say, with the same amount of money, which if markets mean revert, and we all know they will mean revert over the long term, can only be beneficial. So volatility for accumulator, great. Volatility for someone nearing retirement or in retirement, not so great. And I'm sure we've all got stories that we've got from the GFC days where clients had to go back to work, they had to sell things to generate income to survive, or they had to lower their lifestyle expectations. What about how could we position it differently and how could we potentially insure? Yeah. So from our perspective, it's all around this critical zone, the pre-retiree, the retiree, how do we manage the insurance? Yeah. Because what we're effectively trying to do is we're effectively trying to manage the risks. And from our perspective, they are market risk. Yeah. That's what we're experiencing today. And importantly, it's what your clients are experiencing today. Your clients are nervous. We know that. And yes, we have a whole lot of concepts around bucketing. We have defensive assets, growth assets. We'll sell the defensive assets. We've got enough cash to manage it. But is there a different way? Could we talk about insurance? Because at the end of the day, the markets do scare. And certainly the press and everybody else do not help in that conversation at all. We also understand that we need our clients to take market risk, because if they don't take market risk, then their capital is not going to last in their retirement. So it's that kind of catch-22. I need you to take market risk and I need you to take real market risk, but can you manage that emotionally with stability? The next risk is kind of interesting, and a lot's been said about this recently. It's all around this concept of sequencing. And that is that we typically talk to our clients about an average return. So we think the average return you're going to get is X% each year. But we all know in the advice world, the average is not a real number. It's a meaningless number. And it's the sequencing of returns that generates that average, which is really, really important. If I have a couple of negative years when I go into retirement, that will significantly impact the longevity of my capital. Yeah. A simple way to explain this to clients if you need it, and it's just a simple example, right? If I was to say to you that I was going to get 25% return over the next 2 years, you would say the portfolio would have to go up in value. Yeah, that would have to be a good result. Yeah, 25% return next 2 years, that's good. But if I said the way you got that 25% return is you went down 50% in year one and you went up by 100% in year two, the actual impact to the client is zero. They're back to where they started from. You know, our averages are incredibly misleading. We need to make sure we're articulating correctly to our client. The importance is what is the sequence of returns and how do we manage if the client gets negative returns in those first couple of years in retirement or just leading up into retirement and there's a massive impact to their capital position. Yeah? Behavioural, well, I'm sure you're all experiencing that today. Yeah, I'm sure you've all had at least one client ring up and say, I want to go to cash. Please, I can't stand it any longer. The news, I'm depressed, I'm all those sort of things. Behaviourally, how do I manage that? And is there a better way of doing it? Is there a way of talking to our clients around, well, maybe if we insure, then we can manage the behaviours. The last two I won't spend any time on, but obviously longevity and people are living longer, so the issue around the capital and how long that capital lasts becomes more difficult because we have to manage it for a longer period of time. And lastly, inflation, although not a risk at the moment, it's certainly not a risk today, but if markets do mean revert and we do get growth back into the world, how do we manage that inflation? Yeah, so they're kind of the risks we have to think about. And from my perspective, what I'm trying to talk about today is there a way we can manage the risk differently to what we normally do with diversified portfolios, cash buckets, all those bits? Could we actually insure a client's wealth? And if we insure a client's wealth, give them the confidence to invest in growth assets, and just as importantly, the confidence to stay or remain invested if markets do what they're currently doing today. And let's face it, it was only in 2008 when they did it last time. There's little bumps along the way, but these are the large bumps. Because if we could do that, would that put a client in a better position? Would that give the client confidence and emotional stability to actually live the lifestyle that they would like to live? And that's where we think we have an option for you, yeah? And the option is what we refer to as our protected growth guarantee. And the MyNorth Protected Growth Guarantee guarantees to, at the end of a term, return all contributions, less any withdrawals, right? And annually lock in growth as a result of positive investment performance. Yeah, if you remember that chart I showed you at the very beginning, annually lock in growth as a result of positive investment performance. It's offered over 2 contract periods, either 10 years or 20 years. And it has a concept of vesting or participation, which I'll talk about when we get to the next slide. Importantly, it's always invested in the market, and it has been designed to work within the Australian superannuation system. So it has been designed to allow for contributions. It has been designed to allow for withdrawals in retirement. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, right? But effectively what I'm saying is we're going to insure the client's wealth and we're going to lock in growth on an annual basis. So I want to spend a little bit of time on this slide because there are some terms that we all need to understand and the value that those give to your client. And the first thing you can see here is in this example, just to make it fairly simple, is we had a client come into the MyNorth Protected Growth Guarantee and their initial deposit or rollover or contribution was $500,000. Yeah? And that's what we guarantee to return to the client in 10 or 20 years' time, depending upon the contract they took out with us. Yeah, so the first line and the first term we have to understand is this red line. It's what we refer to as the protected balance, the insured amount that we are going to insure a client for, right? So as you can see, that $500,000 remains insured for the first year. Then, in this case, as a result of positive market movements, what happens is that client's account value goes from $500,000 to roughly $575,000, and that is the new locked-in amount. So every anniversary for the client, we look at what their account value is. If the account value is higher than the previous protected balance, we lock that in, and that becomes the new protected balance. That becomes the lowest amount of money the client will receive at the end of the contract, which is now either 9 or 19 years. And as you can see in this particular example, we go on for a number of years before we get to our next lock-in, which happens in 06, right? Again, we look at it, the account value has gone up greater than the previous protected balance, we lock it in, and we lock it in, and we lock it in, yeah? So the protected balance, that is the lowest amount of money the client will receive. The next line we have to look at is this grey line, what we refer to as the North Guardian, right? Now, Rob is going to talk about the Guardian funds after I've concluded my part of the session. Effectively, that's what the client invests in. A really important part about our growth guarantees is that they're not structured products, they're not synthetic products. They are real investments which we put an insurance overlay on. So that means when you're investing in the Guardian Guarantee, there will be some investments in Aussie equities and international equities. And if those Aussie equity funds produce a dividend which has a franking credit, your client gets all that value, right? Gets all that value. But this grey line shows you what is actually happening to that underlying investment fund, yeah, as a result of the asset allocation within the investment fund, and also obviously what the markets are doing. So you can see here between 02 and 03 and 04, markets weren't too great, and the actual client, the value of the client's account was going down. But then from 03 onwards, we had a lovely bull market and everything went well. And you can kind of see, hopefully in this chart, the grey line and the green line kind of overlap at times, and they kind of move away at other times. The green line is what we refer to as the available balance. And the available balance is what the client would be paid if they said, I just want to stop my guarantee and I want my money because I have a reason for it. I have a need, I need to do something, right? So the green line is the available balance. And what it's trying to tell you here is there is no lock-in with our product. Yeah? If a client wants to leave, they can leave, and there are no penalties, there are no exit fees. And in fact, what would happen is if they left at this point, as you can see, the available balance is higher than the North Guardian Fund in 03. So the available is higher than the current asset value. And if they decide to leave, even though they haven't met the term of the contract, we're going to partially pay a guarantee payment to them. Our view is they've been paying guarantee fees all the way along. They should be entitled to receive some value as a result of that. So hopefully that's giving you kind of an idea of how the guarantees work. Now let's talk a little bit more about some of the things you need to be aware of. Firstly, who can invest? So the guarantees as they currently stand have been basically built for individuals. So they are available in superannuation, NCAPs and pensions, and IDPS, so an ordinary individual or an ordinary individual through a self-managed superannuation fund. At this stage, they are not available for companies or trusts. So unfortunately, if there's a trust you're thinking about considering, at this stage, we can't support that. Individuals or self-managed superannuation funds. The common features, as I think I mentioned, the product has been designed to work with superannuation law. So it does allow a client to establish a guarantee and then contribute more money to it. Clearly, if I'm contributing more money, the chances of me getting greater lock-ins because the account value goes up is increasing, right? But we do have some thresholds, right? So the way that works is 15% of the original contribution. I can contribute each and every year. So if the original contribution was $100,000, I can contribute $15,000 each and every year at no additional fee and effectively get that guaranteed or get that insured. If I want to increase or add more than that 15%, I can do so, but there are some additional fees which we refer to the PDS on. Withdrawals in the same way. With withdrawals, I can withdraw up to 15% of what that available balance, we spoke about that just a minute ago, and everything goes down effectively dollar for dollar. Yeah. If there's a situation where the protected balance is greater, yeah, than the account value and I want to withdraw 15%, there will actually be some complicated calculations. What it does mean to the client is they'll actually get some value. And in today's webinar, we can't go through that in detail, but there are some really good worked examples in the PDS to go through. At any stage, please ask some questions in that chat box for us, or alternatively, please get in contact with your BDM who can go through this if that is important to understand, and it should be, right? It works with TTR and recasting. That all works together. I can move the guarantees from super to pension, pension to super, vice versa, and I don't lose anything. So all the value, the time value of the guarantee, the protect, all the information transfers across. As I kind of mentioned, you have access to the capital at all times. Yeah? So if circumstances change and you need to get access, or your client needs access to that capital, you have access to that capital. There are no exit fees and you have full flexibility, right? Full flexibility on how you manage things. Right? I did mention withdrawals, and I just think this one's really important because it is a distinguishing feature of our product, right? So when I said withdrawals will reduce the protected balance, and when I'm talking about withdrawals here, I'm talking about advisor remuneration, so member advice fee or client advice fee if it's IDPS, rollovers, lump sum pension, tax payments, insurance premiums, or pension payments. Yeah. Importantly, what we exclude from withdrawals is our fees. Yeah, any earnings tax plus our fees. So administration fee, the North administration fee, the guarantee fee, buy-sell costs, investment MERs. And I think that's really important, right? Because if I'm saying to my client, give me $100,000 and I guarantee you at the end of the term you'll get $100,000, if we didn't guarantee the fees themselves, that $100,000 over the course of 10 years would by default go down. So a really important point about the way we offer this guarantee is the guarantee also manages the fees. Yeah, so that will not impact your client. All right. Now, lastly, before I hand over to Rob, I just talk about the pricing, and then where do we kind of see how you could use this, right? So what you can see here is the way we offer the protected growth guarantee. So there's a couple of options. There's the 10-year, and with the 10-year, we offer a moderately defensive and a balanced strategy at 1.35 and 1.85, and we offer the 20-year with moderately defensive, balance, and growth. You can see there 0.8, 1.15, and 1.6. Right? We have, and you might ask this question around, well, why don't I get a growth in the 10-year because that would appeal to my client? We kind of have this fundamental thought in our world that says if the guarantee fee was going to be greater than 2%, it's not of value to a client, and that would be the case if we went with a 10-year growth portfolio, so we've kind of capped it out. So those are the fees. Now, in addition to those fees, there's the platform fees, so whatever the North platform fee would be, plus the underlying investment costs, which I think Rob will cover off in a minute. So before I hand over to Rob, just a couple of thoughts around this. So what we're talking about is we're talking about ensuring the client's wealth, yeah, by allowing them to invest in growth assets, yeah, over a 10-year term or a 20-year term to try and maximize the time in the market, knowing that we can control their emotions. And from a financial advice point of view, some of the thoughts you might want to think about is, if I have a client and they're wanting to be invested in term deposits, or they're wanting to be at a 30%, we know that if they're at their risk profile is a 30%, the chances of the longevity of the portfolio aren't great. What would their risk profile be if I could say, well, let's ensure that 30%? Could we move them up a risk profile? So could we move them from 30 to 50%? And if we're doing that, does that put the client in a better position? Does that give them a better chance of making their capital last for the long term? Yeah, if it does, then that would be a good outcome. Equally so, we are hearing, particularly, you know, if I think back to the GFC, when the alternative after the GFC hit is I'll put them into a term deposit. But at that stage, term deposits were paying 6, 7, 8%. So that was a pretty easy decision. Whereas today, if I think, well, I'm just going to put it into a term deposit, the chances, you know, like AMP is offering 2% at the moment for a 5-month term, which is fantastic, but there's no long-term 7 or 8% in cash. So you kind of have a problem there. So again, maybe that conservative or that defensive part of the portfolio, would it make sense to, instead of putting that into cash or some fixed interest, would it make sense to put it into a moderately defensive and insure it? Because it might give the client a better outcome. So with those thoughts, I'm now going to hand over to Rob, who will take you through the Guardian funds, how we protect the guarantee, what our backing is, and then he will close. So thank you very much. And I'll just hand over to Rob now.
Thanks, Ian. Basically, as Ian mentioned, I've worked with the guarantee since we launched it back in 2008 in different variety of different roles. So obviously, it's great that I get the opportunity to present to you today and just give you a bit of background as to the underlying funds. But to talk about the underlying funds, I think what's really important is to understand the context behind the guarantee in terms of how we've had to manage quite a difficult and challenging environment for launching these sorts of products. And the key macro event that we've faced into with the guarantee has been this reduction in interest rates over time. So since 2008, interest rates have really only been going in one direction, and that is down. And obviously, the lower these interest rates go, because we're offering this guarantee on equity assets, that actually does make the guarantee more expensive to offer. So over time, we've had to consider a number of different alternatives. But what we've found as a sweet spot for our guarantees in particular is this concept of offering what we're calling the North Guardian funds. So the North Guardian funds are diversified dynamic asset allocation funds, where the underpinning investment strategy revolves around managing to a level of volatility within the fund. So what that means is when markets have low volatility, so when the equity markets are not particularly volatile, these particular funds actually allow for over-allocation to growth equities. So to give you an example here, a static balance fund would typically go up to 70%, whereas the North Guardian Balance Fund is able to go up to 83%. Now, to manage the dynamic asset allocation strategy within the funds, we actually use a derivative overlay. Now, the reason we use a derivative overlay is to ensure that the underlying holdings in actual assets are not moving. By not moving those underlying holdings, we can preserve and retain the franking credits associated with those holdings, as well as pay distributions as per normal. The second big reason is that using a dynamic overlay allows us to transact very, very quickly and cheaply within the markets without also impacting the capital gains associated with the underlying holdings as well. So having the ability to maintain a stable underlying investment is a real beneficial from a tax perspective. So just to break down further into the offering, so we have 3 funds that are diversified at different levels, one moderately defensive, one at balanced, one at growth. And the key numbers to look at is obviously there's a long-term target, which is equivalent to the static equivalents for each of these funds, but there is a different range for each, and it's quite a broad range. So moderately defensive can go from anywhere between 8 to 59% within equities. Balance can go anywhere from 11 to 83, and growth can go anywhere from 14 to 100. And the key point is that through the dynamic derivative overlay, the fund is able to rebalance between the growth component and the cash component on a fairly regular and easy basis, and very cheap basis as well. In terms of a track record for the funds, so their funds have been available since July 2012. And as you can see here, we've just pulled out the latest Morningstar benchmark data for the North Guardian Balance Funds, as well as the MyNorth Index Balance Funds, both of which are very high performing funds within their own cohorts. And as you can see, as of February 2020, the percentiles are typically within the 25th to the 16th percentile of performance of comparable funds. So that just gives you certainty around this strategy as being effective and not necessarily detrimental to the returns that you receive in the fund. So the other benefit of the North Guardian funds is the fact that the investment strategy is actually an algorithm that tracks the realized volatility in the markets. So what that means is that we can apply this algorithm to historical market scenarios, and we can actually see exactly how it would have performed in each of those markets. There's no subjectivity, there's no assumptions that need to be made. Everything is purely based off the market data that was available at the time. So using that, I can actually pull up a couple of examples to show you where the Guardian funds and the algorithm works well, and where the Guardian funds algorithm doesn't work as well. So the first example I'll run you through is the 2003 bull market followed by the GFC. So as you can see here, this is a 10-year period similar to the PG10. And what you can see here is 3 key events that sort of differentiate the performance between the North Guardian Fund and the static balance fund equivalent. So in this case, what we can see from 2003 all the way through to about midway through 2007, there was quite a significant bull market run, and at the same time as that run, it was fairly low volatility. So what that means is that during that period, the NGF Balance Fund is able to over allocate to equities. So it's been sitting at about 83% equities during this whole period, compared to the static, which is 70%. And then during the GFC itself, as you can see, we're entering a bear market around mid-2007 through to about 2009. And as you can see, because of the higher levels of volatility, as we get further and further through this period, you can see that the drop-off is not as significant for the North Guardian funds, and that is because at this point in time, the equity allocation within the fund has been reduced significantly. So obviously, you can see here that because we are tracking historical measures of volatility, we can't capture the initial falls. However, you can see that the extended falls are somewhat well captured. On the flip side, you can see here that during the recovery, there was some level of volatility, so there is a narrowing between the two funds. However, throughout this 10-year period, you can see that the North Guardian Fund has sustained a higher level of overall return. And if you sort of draw an imaginary average line here, what you can see is that by managing the volatility, the North Guardian Fund can stick closer to that average line throughout the period. And that is as a result of managing to a specific level of volatility. So this is an example where the Guardian funds work particularly well. Obviously, not all market scenarios will follow this type of a pattern, but it is important to know that how the Guardian funds work when volatility is low versus when volatility is high. So here is an example where the Guardian funds don't perform as well. And as we can see, what I'm using here as reference is the 2001 dot-com bubble. Basically, what we can really break this down to as is that during the bull market prior to the bubble popping, we can see that there was actually quite a significant amount of volatility in the market environment at the time. And as a result, on average, the NGF funds held less equity allocation compared to their static equivalents. So naturally, what that would mean is that the performance would not perform as strongly compared to the static equivalent. We can also see here that during the fall, that the lines follow a similar path, which indicates that actually the volatility leading into the bull market and the volatility leading out of the bull market are fairly similar, in the sense that the allocations between the NGF and the static balance fund were relatively similar, particularly during the fall. So this is an example of a market fall that is not tied to significant increases in market volatility, hence the lower performance versus your static balanced equivalent. Now, in terms of the guarantee, a really key component that we take very seriously at AMP is the fact that the guarantee that we offer is only as strong as the provider of that guarantee. So, you know, when markets are falling, when we're in the middle of a GFC, it's actually incredibly critical for us that we are able to make good on any guaranteed benefit payments that are owed to clients, given that they have put their trust in us. And we take that very seriously. And we've also upskilled a lot of our internal staff, including a team which has now come over from the AXA group that we typically had partnered with in the past. And that team has been responsible for managing guarantee books in 3 other APAC countries, totaling about $7 billion in AUM. So really, AMP has developed a really strong expertise in both the offering of this product and also the risk management side of the product. And in terms of how we actually manage the risk of the product, really what I'd refer you to is that we have 2 lines of risk management. The first line of risk management is what we would typically rely upon to source the majority, if not all, of the guaranteed benefits that we expect to pay on our guarantee book. And really, there are 2 core components. One is the guarantee fees that we've collected are held in reserve on the balance sheet in anticipation for paying them back in the event that markets do fall. And the second is a very advanced and sophisticated dynamic hedging strategy where we monitor markets on a daily basis, sometimes intraday, and implement hedging strategies to ensure that we hedge the change in value of the guarantee book, and that those profits that come from those hedging strategies typically also goes towards paying guarantee benefit claims as well. So as I mentioned previously, the first line of risk management is typically what we would require to be able to pay out all claims that are made on the guarantee. And so far, both of these has been sufficient in paying all claims to date. However, we do have fallbacks and contingency, primarily in the form of a second line of risk management. And what we typically hold for second line is risk-based capital. So this is a very common concept across many investment banks and institutional banks, where they hold additional capital on their balance sheet to account for extreme market events or extreme market scenarios. So in our case, we actually hold enough capital on the balance sheet based on our modeling of a 1 in 200 year event. So a 1 in 200 year event, for example, just to give you an idea of the quantum, this hasn't actually ever occurred before. This is an unspoken event, that it's an unknown event or a black swan. So we hold a significant amount of capital to cover for us in this type of a market event on top of the hedging programs that we have above. And the second part of that is that AMP Holdings Limited actually has an undertaking, and this is disclosed within the PDS, to make sure that any claim, guarantee claim, that a customer is owed on the MyNorth Guarantee products, any claim will be paid for by the AMP Holdings company in the event that the guarantee providing entity cannot make that payment. And just a couple of things I would also note here is that the North Guardian funds, the other key benefit of the North Guardian funds is the fact that it allows us to implement this dynamic hedging program with a significantly higher level of certainty. A key risk in the management of the product is the risk of volatility, market volatility, making it very difficult or impossible to put on hedging positions. By using the North Guardian funds as our underlying, what that does is that allows us to guarantee the ability to trade in those markets because of the volatility control that's within those funds. So that is a very key component of the offering, and it does help us keep the costs lower than what they otherwise would be. So that concludes our presentation for today. As mentioned by Ian, if you want more information on the guarantee or the Guardian funds, please contact your BDM or visit North Online for our collateral of the products. If you do have any questions, please leave them in the chat and we'll get back to you. And also, if you could please also complete the feedback form to help improve these webinars, that would be greatly appreciated. Thanks for your time, everyone, and hope you have a good day.